All right, everyone. Welcome once again to the Faces of Business. I'm your host. With me today, I have Francois Jaffres. Francois, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. So this topic today, optimizing your e-commerce supply chain, I think is really relevant, and I didn't even realize it, but I've got several supply chain speakers lined up almost in a row. Good. Because it's a big deal right now. Nobody was talking to last week. I was talking to someone about it, and they said no one even knew what supply chain was 18 months ago, and now that's all everyone talks about because we've got shortages in IC chips and coffee and there's just so many things. If you go and look at what there's actual shortages of that you don't really know about, and the thing that I find interesting about when you look at consumer products, the stores do a really good job of hiding the fact that they've got shortages because they'll fill in the shelves with other stuff.
They do. I used to be a merchandiser for Coca-Cola, and I saw how they would do that.
Oh yeah, there you go. So it's so interesting. So Francois, tell us a little bit about your. First of all, thanks for being here. If I didn't say that already, and
yeah, it's a pleasure.
it's awesome to get your perspective because you're helping people globally source and manage that whole supply chain. So let's start back a little bit farther though, and really kind of give us some background and tell us how you kind of got into supply chain at a time when people weren't really talking supply chain.
Yeah, it's crazy. First of all, that people don't talk supply chain more often than today. 18 months ago, it's really because people ran out of toilet paper, and then they were like, "Oh, the supply chain on the news, supply chain on the memes and everything." My introduction was definitely far earlier than that. It was more so my background at school. So I studied industrial engineering. Which was fun. It's a lot of processes, a lot of manufacturing. Like I said in our conversation before this, it's no mechanical engineer, but we do tend to problem solve like on a I would say a larger scale rather than more of a product scale.
Yeah.
And so that's really where I started learning more about everything that went into it. So, for example, manufacturers, how they select, the labor force that they need, indirect versus direct labor costs when it comes to inventory management, inventory carrying cost and control, and looking at optimizations and like delivery and where they're going to manage their next warehouses, where they're going to store their inventory. So all of this I was actually exposed to in school, not on a very, very deep scale. But I finally got the opportunity at one point to intern here at Noviland, and it was really just a concept to optimize and really revolutionize the way supply chain management's handled. And this was back in 2016. And I was the third person with the company at the time, third or fourth person with the company. And the way that they described it to me, as soon as I got done with the interview, I went online and I Googled every single thing that they could have possibly talked to me about on the interview. And I was like, they're absolutely right. There is no simple way of doing this business. And when I say that, I mean the more traditional sense of a business owner going to a manufacturer, going to a factory owner and saying, "Hey, this is my product and this is my investment and my strategy behind it. Can we go ahead and get this product produced? And these are my forecasts," for example. And I'm sorry, can you hear that vacuum in the background?
No. Just faintly. It's not bad at all. So we're
okay. Good. Okay, good. And so, they essentially it's merging a technology as well as this human element of, connecting those factories with these business owners to optimize that process. It fascinated me. It seemed like a huge problem and a huge gap that no one was really looking to solve. We have things like Alibaba, an amazing marketplace, I would say, where anyone can go on and list, though. That's one of the problems. It's kind of like Craigslist today here in the US.
Yeah.
Very similar there. And so there was no real personal touch to it. So we said, hey, why don't we look at this from a different angle of, there's the traditional sourcing agent where you have one representative tries to oversee a lot of the, the business doings with the factory. They look at, the logistics aspect, but they don't have to get into every single piece of the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
They don't have time to look at optimizing the packaging size, for example, to fit more into a container, to seeing how many fit onto a pallet so you can optimize a pallet, and how you're going to distribute that. It's actually a very big job.
And that's a ton of work. I've had to do that project doing, and in the last 10, 15 years, I've done some of the international sourcing projects, and just getting just what you said, the container size, the carton size, how many go into a carton of an item, and then how many go on a pallet, and how that fits into a container is huge, especially if you're going to, in the life cycle of the project. It was a fairly big project I was working on. And I think it was a difference between like thousands of containers on an annual basis. It was nuts how many containers it really turned out to be. So that's a big deal. Just optimizing the size of just maximizing your density in the containers.
Yeah. Yeah. And not only that, but also being able to effectively communicate with those factories, right? Where traditionally they might have to visit overseas. We saw just in these past 2 years that that's almost impossible now.
Yeah.
So now we are resorting to more virtual and Zoom meetings, which is great. But it does still remove that element of that personal touch, right? Being able to actually see them face to face. What are they saying? Are they saying, when they say no to me, how are they saying it? or I guess more importantly, when they say yes to me, how are they saying it? Are they saying, yes, I can do that change? Or are they saying, yeah, I could do that for you? And it's a whole different concept. With the latter being, hey, there's probably going to be some quality control risks. It might be a longer time to develop the product itself. They may be subcontracting some parts of those out. But overall, it's just a very complex process. It's something that we're not going to be able to solve immediately. I don't think anyone is.
Mm-hmm.
If they are, they're an absolute genius Einstein out there, because this is a global issue. But also the problem with it is that when things remain the status quo, innovation doesn't tend to be there.
Yeah.
Right? So when we've seen the supply chain stay exactly the same for the past few decades, it's hard for someone to come in this space and say, hey, there's something wrong with this, because everyone says, no, I've been doing this the same. And everything's been working out for me.
Well, and I think too that awareness is a big thing, because, like you said, there's some traditional brokerish type models where people do it, but they really don't talk about the product or have enough of a network of manufacturers globally that can actually look at 2 or 3 places to source the product. There's all the things that I think that you've talked about that are really key into that, that you're doing differently, that does make things a lot different than the traditional. I either know a factory or that knows a factory, or I have a broker that's helping me do this. I mean, I did it years ago, back in the early 2000s, where sourced products in China, just like you said, Alibaba, weeded down between a few factories that can do it, and go visit them. And that process was painstakingly slow and hard, compared to what you're talking about, where I could bring my, product specifications or component specifications to you, whatever it may be. And you can do a lot of that with existing relationships.
And that also means that we can't do every single project.
Yep.
Right. We don't have every factory under our belt. And we recognize that. We're very upfront about it within just a few days. Hey, we don't have a factory for you. These might be some great resources.
Yeah.
There's trade associations, for example, in China that a lot of people don't know about. They hear trade and they immediately think trade agent. Well, there's an association, for example, for light goods, or for electronics, or for certain types of components and hardware. And some of the top factories tend to be a part of these associations, and they go to conferences and they network, right? So It's knowing what's actually happening overseas. And I mean, don't get me wrong. A lot of U.S. importers are very aware of that. They also go to these, these shows, and they network too.
Yeah.
By any means necessary, because that is the best way to actually handle an effective supply chain. It's not the most efficient by any means. Traveling, spending a day just in flight is not the most efficient. But it'll do wonders to your overall supply chain.
Yeah, that's for sure. So let's talk a little bit about what the last couple of years, and it's funny now because we're actually getting nearly, what is it? We're a year and a half full into it. Just say February until now, or March until now. We're almost into September. It seems like that time's flown by, but kind of give us what really happened into the importing supply chain last year. I mean, was there a time that it was like the containers were coming in and they just stopped for a while and then they started up again kind of normally? Or what happened last year? That, because we've been, like I said, we've been insulated from some of this. We've seen a lot of it, but what happened just from like the physical flow of goods last year?
I think, well, for starters, Chinese New Year, right? Chinese New Year happens every year around January, February. Tends to halt most of the global supply chain even, because it does. Yeah. And those 2 weeks that they're closed, and there's 2 weeks post Chinese New Year, then there's typically 2 to 4 weeks before that when everyone's leaving. And factory, employee turnover with it, and then they have to retrain workers. There's just a lot of knock-on effects by itself for Chinese New Year, and now that itself was amplified by COVID.
I didn't realize that could coordinated almost horribly, because it was getting over about the time that COVID was starting, and there's virtually no production during that time. So you either get your products on the water before that or to the dock before that, or you don't get them until, in April, May, because just think of transit time. So that they couldn't have hit at a worse time. So we have the Chinese New Year hits, and then COVID hits.
And then COVID hits. I would say the past 2 years has been the worst series of unfortunate events. But to track back to the beginning, Chinese New Year hits, COVID hits, and we saw a slowdown in businesses that were actually placing orders, but not a slowdown in businesses that were requesting quotes. So RFQs, right? Submitting those RFQs to us, which I found interesting because the logic behind it didn't make much sense. You're asking someone to quote you when all of their component suppliers, all of their upstream supply chain is also shut down. So it was difficult all around to get quotes. And a lot of who we were talking to were also using Alibaba. But a little bit less experience, to where they might be working with a trade agent. Trade agents, they have their merit to them, but they don't always have, their goal is sales. It's not always to build a relationship or to be the most honest. And so we saw that little bit of a slowdown, but really when China kept everything closed, it was hard to manufacture anything. And when these components are going global, it's not just to your final goods. It could be your final goods being made in India, and they're sourcing, let's say, zippers from China. Right. And if they can't get those zippers, then they can't finish the hoodie that you're making, or whatever the case may be. And so we just saw that trickle effect start. And a few months later, May, June, July, we really started to see it pick back up in regards to production. Well, the issue with it is we saw a big boom in e-commerce specifically. And so a lot of retailers might have started to be thinking, well, crap, we have to actually get these products listed online. And, Sears, Macy's, all these different big box stores also are struggling with, let's say, warehousing, because they traditionally will store things more in their retail stores. They might have some distribution centers, and then they handle cross-docking from there. Would this put a strain on warehouses? Because everyone was looking for somewhere to receive their product. And Amazon was having its issues too. Right. So, and that's more so going very downstream. We skipped a whole step of logistics. And now we're talking PPE is at a full swing, right? Everyone is trying to get product out of China into the US or just anywhere in the world, particularly face masks. And these products are small, but they're single use and they take up a lot of volume in a container. Well, also, they halted the airline flights, right? I believe it was the 747s and the Boeings, because regular air travel was halted by itself. So they stopped bringing, I think, 40% of all packages that they typically bring from China to the US or something along those lines.
There's that many packages that come in commercial airline flights across
commercial. Yeah. Yeah. They go in the underbellies of them.
Yeah.
To the point to where now a lot of companies are chartering their own planes, and instead of having people fly on them, they're just loading boxes on them. And we saw this with PPE too.
Yeah.
Actually, it was who has the product first. So this is really where we started to see the first bit of strain, aside from the toilet paper, of course. It's PPE.
Yeah.
And so with all of that space being taken up specifically for PPE, because a lot of people were trying to make a buck.
Yeah.
Also, a lot of people, let's say hospitals and group purchasing organizations,
they were struggling
to get it too. Yeah.
Yep.
So it was to the point to where my team was sending me pictures of factories that were produced. Some of them were pop-up factories. They were factories that produced something else, and then they started producing PPE out of nowhere because the opportunity was there. Well, there were lines over a mile long of people with cash in hand to go to the factories and actually buy masks so they can resell them. And at the same time, group purchasing organizations, we were working with some state governments also. They were looking to buy the same exact thing. Yeah. And so you have, let's say, the state of West Virginia competing against New Jersey, but they're still trying to perform business as usual. They're trying to send a letter of intent, for example. Wire some money through an escrow. Well, factories are like, why would I do that when I have an entire mile of people willing to pay the exact same price as you, but they have cash in hand?
Cash in hand, gonna hand it over. They're ready to go.
Yeah. They're ready to go. And so that caused a lot of strain on logistics. And then we saw a lot of retail goods, of course, start to pick back up. We saw a huge boom in Amazon, for example, quarter over quarter. And so factories were really struggling with just keeping up with the demand in general. And on top of that, logistics was already backed up. A lot of people were storing PPE in containers, for example. Everything was leaving China. The issue was nothing was going back. So you had a ton of containers, and traditionally they do export more than they import, I believe, from the US. But so they have a ton of containers that are just leaving. No one can find these containers now. So now you start to see these costs go up from like $3,000 to $3,500 to $4,000. I remember when it hit $5,000 at a meeting with my boss, and I was like, oh, shit, what are we going to do? Like it's already getting up there. It's, almost 2 times what it was before. The lead times were getting longer. And then it got to 10,000 and then 12,000, 15,000, 17,000. Now we're seeing like $19,000 for a container that traditionally costed about $3,000 to $4,000. Yeah. And I'm talking like a Ningbo to Long Beach port. And so now
so that's not even getting on the train and bringing it across the United States or the middle of the country or anything.
No, that's just port to port. And we're seeing
oh my goodness.
Well, this is really a time where carriers don't care to make more space available because they're making so much money on it.
Yeah.
I just read actually the U.S. Agriculture Institute or something along those lines is, I think, filing a lawsuit because they are not getting the containers that they were promised. And usually a container going back to China is about $600 to $1,000. Well, let's say Costco or anyone that's leasing out these containers goes, why would I give it to you for $600? You're going to keep it for 3 weeks because we have to take it to you. You have to load it. We have to transport it, get it put onto the boat, taken back, unloaded. Why would I waste 3 weeks when I can get it back to China within 2 weeks and I can flip that same container for another $15,000? So it's all about economics, right? And these knock-on effects just keep going and going and going. Sourcing is backed up because manufacturers are getting larger orders. Logistics is backed up because there's a global container shortage. We had issues like the Suez Canal, which amplified a lot of these issues.
It's amazing now that you kind of go through this chronologically, how bad that screwed things up. First the Chinese New Year, then the Suez Canal, and we already had COVID going, which made it very challenging. So we were hosed.
Yeah. And that's why I'm saying, this is very much something that you can't do business as usual. This series of unfortunate events, I think, bursted a bubble of perfection in supply chain. This concept that, Toyota brought to market of lean manufacturing and lean processes just can't hold up as easily in today's environment as it did 2 years ago.
That's the one thing I think that if anybody has realized is that decades of leaning out supply chains and going, okay, we got inventory here, we got inventory there, and we don't have to do it. It doesn't hold up when you've got supply chain disruptions.
Right.
It just doesn't. And I think that from the people that I've been talking to, we're seeing a lot more dual sourcing on critical items because it just makes sense, and to continue buying from both sources to make sure they're relevant and still able to produce and some of the stuff they got to do. But that's a great point that the normal lean supply chain it just really doesn't survive well in this situation.
Well, the concept of lean is interesting, right? You can only really make something lean when it's perfect.
Yeah.
Or once you're, let's say you're applying some Six Sigma to it, or you're just trying to optimize. You can't optimize something that's not standardized already, right?
Yeah.
And in today's environment, nothing is standardized. The worst is always ahead. That's one thing I tend to always say when it comes to supply chain. It's there are great moments, and they could be long, great moments.
Yeah.
But I mean, the worst is always going to be ahead. The worst thing that happened to you this year is only the worst thing that happened to you this year. It's not the worst thing that happened to you next year.
Yeah. Yeah. So first of all, have the container prices started to come back down? Are we still living? Not yet. So we're still paying that much. So, oh, wow. So that had to, then when you're looking, the cost inflation on all the goods that you can get just because of container price, because when you look at, if I was paying $3,000 or $4,000 to get that container, now I'm paying $15,000. Just say it's 5x times. But if I've got a 100K worth of product inside of there that I'm trying to sell, that just means that I had to raise the price of that by 10%. Just to cover the cost of shipping increase of that container, just that first leg.
You would think it's that easy. A lot of brands that we talk to and that we work with are terrified, absolutely mortified of raising any sort of price.
Yeah. Yeah.
It always comes back to, well, let's get better pricing from the factory. Well, the factories are already running on, let's say, 16, 17% margin. And the cost of the US dollar versus the renminbi isn't the best right now. So let's try to find a different solution. How about we maybe take off your packaging and do master cartons, and then you package them in the US? Is that cheaper? These are conversations a lot of times that we have that business owners don't want to hear. They want to close their ears and say, no, I just want to do it my way. Well, just like, the group purchasing organizations and the state governments with PPE, it's not doing business as usual. It's very much looking at this as a two-way road, right? You have to take as much as you give. And a lot of times that's just done through conversations. And we've had some really innovative conversations. Hey, how can we flat pack some of this furniture instead of having any of it assembled, right? For example, when cabinetry actually encountered an anti-dumping and countervailing duty about a year and a half ago to 230 or 260% for all imports coming from China. Well, some of our larger customers said, well, what are we going to do? We have to go somewhere else. Well, what we know with boots on the ground is that some of our factories have already started to look into real estate in Vietnam. and we can help, bring those two solutions together. Someone has a problem. These factories with the real estate infrastructure in Vietnam already have a solution. Well, now it's also working through compliance issues, of course, and looking at costs and supply chain in Vietnam and understanding the infrastructure that they have built. Right. Like one interesting thing that I found out during the whole cabinetry issue, and cabinetry is still an issue today, but that could be a whole different podcast. But in Vietnam, for example, the factory actually had to hire twice the labor force than they did for standard production runs in China, because every 2 weeks they were losing workers and they didn't realize why. Well, I guess in this the city in Vietnam that they're in, traditionally the workers will work for those 2 weeks until they have enough money to give their families to pay off, let's say, food and rent. And the men that will go to work will actually go get they go to have a good time for a little time until they need more money. So they had to constantly start to rotate out these workers. But it's something that they weren't used to. So now we have to have those conversations with, the importers in the US, explain to them, this is what's happening. This is why your orders are delayed. But that's all they are. They're conversations, and that's all you should be asking for of your suppliers. Of course, contracts are great. And, putting in, let's say, stipulations of this is how long it should take, and these are some potential penalties that could happen if you're late or whatever the case may be. It's great to have in a contract, but the supplier can fire you just as fast as you could fire them. So it's important to know that. And, to your point of diversification, very important. I think that's one thing that has helped a lot of companies sustain just steady inventory. So if you could outsource it to somewhere else, not the same country that you're already producing in, but outsourcing it somewhere else, even if it costs you a little bit more, see that as a cost of risk mitigation, right? I mean, how much do you care about having inventory? I hope the answer is that that's your utmost importance. Right? Without inventory, you have no marketing, you have no PPC, you have no sales, so you have no revenue. So that small cost can definitely go a long way.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because we're talking about this in 2021, and 3 or 4 years ago now, when the initial tariffs came in from imported products. I mean, we did a bunch of work with a client to dual source different countries, like you said, to be able to continue to move product, the same product, that into their facilities to be able to ship to consumers. And I have to imagine that you had the double whammy going too for anybody trying to get product in, is the fact that we were all stuck at home for a while and the e-commerce sales shot through the roof. So the normal demand was out the window, and now you have customers that want twice as much as they originally projected, with all the problems that we just talked about.
Yeah, and we're pretty big into building materials too. And so we work with a lot of wholesalers, particularly for building materials, and that industry itself shot up. I mean, when construction slowed down for a short bit, but as soon as everyone was able to get back to work, it just continued rising. And that's why, the cost of, let's say, building a home, I think went up 50 or 60% at one point, starting to normalize again. But I mean, it was a struggle, definitely, but that's where we decided to get innovative too. We opened up a 28,000 square foot warehouse 19 months ago. It was really, really like right before COVID. And it was more of a side project. Well, by the end of this year, we're projecting over 1 million square feet in just fulfillment space.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
So it's an exciting time. And that's where I say, innovation is really driven through, these issues. When we see that there's problems and people start to realize, I can't do business as usual, you have to find solutions. That's where you find service providers, and you find, individuals like yourself that can just help them think of that next thing through. How can we solve this problem? Not just complain about it.
Yeah. Well, and so something I heard the other day, and maybe you guys are starting to help people with this, is there's a lot of there was talk anyway, and I only read a couple articles about it, where people that are actually doing a lot of FBA sales on Amazon are finding it necessary to have more offsite inventory locations just to make sure they're replenishing the FBA locations, in a timely manner. Because people that don't understand FBAs, you charge for the space you use, and you can only put so much in there at a given time. So it's not quite as bad as shipping products just in time to an automotive plant, but it's you can't load them up and let them run on it for 2 months or anything like that, or months and months and months. I don't know what the exact terms are now, because it changes with their space, and it changes with the popularity of your product, the size and type of product, all kinds of things. So is that part of what you guys got into, is actually being that kind of stopping point so they could distribute to the FBA locations from where you're at?
Yeah, that's and that's an interesting concept itself too, because again, 2 years ago, no one thought about IPI, or Inventory Performance Index, and this is basically a score that Amazon gives you on your conversion rate, on how quickly you sell out of your inventory, or your daily sales increasing. It's a series of 4 things, and we have a great blog on it that my co-host Lisa actually wrote. And all of a sudden, of course, Amazon is going to do what's in their best interest. They no longer want to be a warehouse. They want to be a fulfillment center. They want the least amount of, they want to be leaner, right? They want the least amount of products that they can sell out as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And so a lot of businesses started to realize this, like, well, if they can change my IPI score, or my inventory limits, which traditionally, if you were a decent seller, you didn't have any. And then it changed to, you can only have 200 units in a warehouse. And now it's, I think, 1,000 units per category. So if you're in a kitchen space or category, 1,000 units is nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, for a standard business that's selling on Amazon, 1,000 can be like less than a week's worth of inventory.
Yeah.
A few days even.
Well, especially if you had you could have 1,000 SKUs.
Exactly.
You get one of each.
And so now they of course let you open up different storefronts.
Yeah.
It's a lot more to manage. But this importance of keeping inventory offsite has definitely played a role in not only the supply chain, but the pricing, right?
Yeah.
You now have to consider getting those products to a 3PL, a reliable 3PL that can receive your inventory, palletize it as needed, prepare it for Amazon FBA, bill for Amazon FBM if you need it also. If you have multi-channels, let's say Shopify or Walmart or anywhere else, they should be able to fulfill those as well. Well, how far is that from an Amazon facility? How much is it going to cost to get it to the Amazon facility? How long is it going to take to check into the Amazon facility? There's all these new steps that business owners have to think about now. It's something that we like to just take off their plate and say, hey, we'll tell you exactly when it arrives, when it's going to be shipped, when it arrives at Amazon, and from there Amazon checks it in.
And you make a great point though, just about checking into an Amazon FBA facility. I remember there were times you wait 10 days for it to get checked in, and I imagine if they're busy,
a lot of lost inventory.
Yeah, just lost too. Yeah, lost inventory, and you have to go back and prove that you actually shipped it there, and then they can find it. Yeah.
Well, what they also didn't say, and they didn't release it to anyone, we found out from one of the drivers that left our facility, Amazon at one point stopped signing proof of deliveries, the PODs that usually they would sign at the warehouse itself because of COVID, social distancing. And so they said that they were going to do it electronically, but a lot of them didn't. They would just say, hey, this is the proof of you, the proof that you had a scheduled appointment, but since they didn't sign it, you have no proof of delivery. So even if you make a claim to Amazon, they would say, well, send me your proof of delivery. Well, I don't have one. They never signed one because they said they weren't doing that. So now an Amazon representative is confused about the Amazon policies. This company is way too big. And they can't keep up. I mean,
interesting stuff though. I mean, it's fascinating when you look in the supply chain and the little intricacies and the challenges, because like you said, this is just one problem or a series of problems that kind of hit us all at once. But as we kind of see ourselves navigating the way through this. What are some of the cool things that you're seeing emerge from things that are happening, what people are doing that really look like it's exciting to be in the supply chain world, and what's happening that you like to talk about?
Innovation and maturity are the two biggest things that I've definitely seen. We're not the only supply chain, company out there. We're not the only sourcing company out there by any means, but we have started to see more competition, which we welcome. Very much welcome. It's something that's the reason that we got into the space for it to change, because there are problems that a lot of people haven't seen.
Yeah.
And maturity in the sense that, we're starting to see a lot of businesses boom out of nowhere, and they're starting to find new solutions. So tools that are being built for forecasting, for example, or dual modeling and logistics is starting to be used more often by larger companies if they can afford it, if they have the right partnerships in line. I find that very exciting, more so because I think it's going to have a trickle effect into just general infrastructure when it comes to, let's say, trucking and automation in trucking. How important is that? Because nowadays we can't get trucks.
Yeah.
Well, what if we try to automate some of that? What's that going to make more efficient? It's going to make the deliveries more efficient, might make the pickups more efficient, less truck waiting times at docks. Well, now that we have this, we have to learn how to optimize, let's say, ERPs and warehouse management solutions also, or systems. Well, once those are optimized and they're able to be integrated with more marketplaces and platforms, then we automate that next step, all done through technology, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a lot of people behind it. Well, then also, how can we make warehouses safer? Let's reduce the number of accidents in warehouses. Well, we can incorporate maybe some robotics or some automation in that. We can change the methods of picking and packing. The innovation, it seems like a problem that's never going to be solved. Is the way that I look at it. It's what industrial engineering most got me excited, I guess, about just college in general.
Yeah.
And it's something that I get to do every single day. So it's something where I love it. I think, if any business isn't focusing on supply chain, I hate to say it, but they may fail in the near future because they're not going to be able to keep up with general supply chain. They're not going to be able to keep up with innovation.
Yeah.
It's going to be really hard to play catch up there.
Yeah.
So it's fun stuff. It's never a boring day, I guess is a good way to put it.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. So I'm coming back around again. There's some good things are happening. You're seeing there's these things that are changing. So do you think that, I lost my train of thought a little bit, which is, usual, but do you think that we are going to see some permanent changes, or do you think that as soon as we turn out of this, right, and just say we're sitting here a year from now and whatever, they figured out how to keep us safe so we don't have to close things down like this anymore, or on and off, whatever, we don't know, safe, whatever you want to call it. Do you think that people are just going to swing right back into that, or do you really think this is going to cause some long-term change?
I hope that we find a light at the end of this tunnel in innovation again. I really hope that we stop doing business as usual. I hope this changes everyone's mindset and changes the fact that lean is great, but it's not the only way. It's not the only thing to focus on. And I think that's what's really going to drive innovation. I think now people have started to see, particularly business owners, but they've started to see even consumers, no toilet paper again.
Yeah.
But they've started to see that this is an important aspect of everyday life. And that there should be a lot invested into this, whether it's conversations, whether it's money, whether it's inspiring other great thought leaders to just come up with the next big thing. I'm very excited to see the changes that this has on supply chain. Unfortunately, I think there are going to be a lot of business owners that do go back to doing business as usual. Perfectly fine. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? But I also think this is going to spark that next great thought in someone to say, hey, that's a problem I think I could solve.
That would be cool if it does. That's for sure. And I'm sure there are going to be pieces of that, no doubt. I mean, especially when you think about just applying some sort of technologies to better know where products are or whatever it is, or like you're talking about automation of some of the trucking things. I mean, there's just so many opportunities that could help us out at different places in the supply chain. And I read an article recently about it was talking about supply chain, but it was mentioning how dependent we've become on a global supply chain. And they were talking about, sit down at your dinner table and just look at the food that's on your plate. And they were breaking it down, and it was like, this product came from this part of the world. This product came from this part of the world. This product came from this part of the world. And, and it's all not coming from you. And then it went to the factory, it was grown here, went to the factory and was processed, went to your next, that might've moved countries in that. So we've integrated these supply chains, these complex supply chains to make sure that we can go to the grocery store any day of the week and buy, whatever it is, broccoli or whatever we want really at the stores. Right. And the challenge is not simply one or the other or making it a local supply chain, because you can't in some of this. And really it's just planning for these disruptions and better insulating them from these challenges, I think, is about the only thing you're going to be able to do long term with some of these innovations.
It's definitely not a single answer problem.
Yeah.
I mean, just like we call it a chain for a reason, right? Every link has to work perfectly for the next link to work perfectly also.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there's not a single problem. That's why I think there's going to be so much innovation across the board. And I think the smallest things that we never realized are going to be something that we innovate on. That's what I'm most excited about. It's just new problems every single day.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right, though. It could be the smallest, simplest things making a huge difference.
Yeah. Hopefully we get more visionaries out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff. Well, Francois, it's been awesome talking to you today. And this supply chain and understanding a global supply chain. If someone wants to reach out to you and talk to you about optimizing your e-commerce supply chain or with general supply chain questions, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. So if you look up my name, Francois Jaffres, spelled Francoise, Francois. People see me and they think Francisco. No, I'm Francois.
Yep.
LinkedIn. Another way is just Noviland, Noviland.com.
Very
go
good.
on the contact form there, and I'll be sure to see it.
All right. Awesome. Well, Francois, it's been great talking to you today about optimizing your e-commerce supply chain, the e-commerce and supply chain challenges in general over the last 18 months, and your thoughts towards future innovations in supply chain. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Damon.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Appreciate you. Love the input that we get about new guests and other things. We will be back here again on Thursday talking with more interesting people in business. Thanks a lot.